from the Mercy One studio.
Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
Welcome to our show, produced from Iowa Catholic Radio Mercy One Studios. Bud, it's good to see you. How are you doing this week?
It's amazing to be here. This is a weird time of year, Bo. I saw yesterday on social media that we in Nebraska, there was one town where it was 14 degrees and snowing, and then in Omaha it was 70 degrees and sunny. So Mother Nature's just sort of schizophrenic right now.
You know, they always have the Christmas songs that say it's the most magical time of year, but it really is March, where you can have a tornado and then be snowed in.
Yeah, when do the tornadoes really get underway?
Well, in Iowa, not to talk trash, because I know that everybody acts the weather's bad here, but I don't know. It seems to me the tornadoes are a little far off. In Oklahoma, March, you start having tornadoes. April and May are like primo tornado season.
Oklahomans seem proud of their tornadoes.
We're very proud of all of the disasters that we deal with.
In Nebraska and Iowa, we like to think we seriously face down this natural disaster. But I've seen images of Oklahoma tornadoes, and you guys aren't messing around.
Well, one of the weird things when we moved up here is the storms that would hit in Oklahoma, so like we'd hear from Mom and Dad, would then hit us like 2 or 3 hours later. So we were always getting weather like at midnight or 1.
Yeah.
And so that was weird.
Well, one thing I did appreciate about Pittsburgh is it's supposed to be the least amount of natural disasters in all of America. Like of the major urban centers, you're least likely to be hit by a flood or tornado, and they just don't have to deal with anything.
They have 3 rivers and they never flood?
Maybe the downtown area, but it's a low incidence. But growing up in Nebraska, I had nightmares about tornadoes, just like that dream where you're driving down the interstate and one's bearing down on top of you, and you always have to like jump in the ditch because there's nowhere else to go.
That's right. We always had tornado drills where they're talking about and just jump in the ditch, and all of us were like, yeah. At that point, don't lie to us. Like we may as well stand up and film it, right?
Yeah.
They said no, but We want to point out that you don't need to worry currently. We're not saying that there's any sort of storm watches or anything like that. However, if you ever need help because of storm-inflicted injuries, we got you. Because Mercy College of Health Science underwrites our show, and the good nurses and allied health students that we train are there in case of emergencies.
Yeah, and as academic dean, seeing some of what's going on at Mercy, we've got, I think, a lot of exciting things in the works. But just in a year where I know our country has walked through some serious challenges related to public health, it's great to be at a place like Mercy providing the kind of education it does.
Well, one of the great honors that we have, of course, is our alumni and getting to keep in touch with people who've graduated. And one of the things that we do, I know that's one of the things we forgot to say. So Bud and I both work at Mercy College, and you just said what that is, and I'm the director of I'm the senior advisor to the president for mission initiatives, and one of those initiatives is the director for the Center for Human Flourishing, one of the things we started. And we're getting a chance to actually talk with our students who in this last year have done things like been on the COVID wards and things like this. And so getting to hear the bravery of our students, and not just as a mere accolade, that they really did go through heart-rending and courageous and virtuous ways in which they were there for our communities in the middle of great difficulty. I look forward to being able to share what we're hearing from our graduates and the great work that they've done.
Well, you mentioned the Center for Human Flourishing that's getting underway, Bo, and for myself, that's just another sign that at Mercy it's not simply about preparing just medical professionals who know like all the statistics and the right medication to use, et cetera, although that's absolutely essential, but trying to approach those questions through the eyes of faith and drawing upon the Catholic intellectual tradition and with our tradition, the great resources that it brings to those important questions.
Well, and I think that's sort of apropos to the show that we're talking about today. We're going to have, on the first half of the show, our guest is Santonio Hill, who works for Vagabond Missions. You can check out what they're doing at vagabondmissions.com. We're going to be talking about how evangelism relates to the common good. I think a lot of times, Bud, people think of evangelism, and they think of it as sort of the one-on-one transmission of information about the faith, and very much so, of course, that is absolutely part of it. But I think with what we're going to be able to have a chance talking with Santonio is to point out the incarnational way in which mission work starts to show what we think about the sort of social teaching of the church and the communal way in which evangelization has to happen. That there's so much that goes into building up the body politic that ends up being building up the body of Christ. And I'm looking forward to being able to talk to Santonio about that.
Yeah, this should be a great interview. And during my time in Pittsburgh, I was able to meet a couple of the missionaries. And I was personally challenged just by seeing the way that they were willing to go out of their comfort zones. If you think about ministry in the urban core today, like just speaking very directly, there's a lot of felt needs. There's a lot of youth who are looking for hope. And so it's really it's powerful to be a part of a church where, there's members of the body of Christ who are on the front lines, so to speak, of that sort of ministry. Yeah, and I know he's on the front lines, and especially on a new one. So I think when you're in the middle of starting something new, I'm glad that he's willing to come on and talk to us, because I'm sure it's a sort of disorienting sort of reality, because there's ways in which certain evangelistic efforts we make have sort of grand precedents, right, that people are kind of utilizing and forming themselves. But I really do think in some ways Vagabond Missions is doing work that we've dropped the ball and we need to reinvigorate. And so I'm glad that we're going to get to talk about what that reinvigoration looks like. Yeah, I know we use the phrase in today's church a lot, the new evangelization, and sometimes it's unclear exactly what that means, but I think this has to be part and parcel of it, and just keeping our eyes wide open to places where God is calling us to address the sorts of things that you're bringing up. Absolutely. You'll want to stick around. Bo Bonner with Dr. Bud Marr. This is The Uncommon Good, talking to Santonio Hill of Vagabond Missions right after we get done. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this. Folks, if you want to have a chance to talk to us, to text us, to ask us questions, it's easy to do. Just use the Zipwhip line. What was that head shake? 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150. Bud, I want you to get to comment on the Zipwhip line, because you're in studio now, so you can... I think my specific challenge regarding the Zipwhip line this week is share with us your most harrowing natural disaster stories or dreams, whatever it happens to be, your favorite natural disaster films. We're all ears. 515-223-1150, the Zipwhip line. Your place for the hashtag UCG for the Uncommon Good, hashtag natural disasters, hashtag natural disasters. Speaking of disasters, the timing of the Zipwhip line this week is something to stand back and admire in its own way. It's slipping on ice, or it's worried. But at any rate, this is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after these messages.
Thanks to Blessman International for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Every year, Blessman International leads teams of Central Iowans to share the compassionate heart of Christ with orphans and vulnerable children in South Africa. You can learn more and sign up for a trip at blessmaninternational.org.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Catholic Women Now provided in part by Marr Security, providing security solutions for homes and businesses since 1953. Marr Security is a Catholic-owned family business supplying security systems, access control systems, video surveillance, fire alarm systems, and video doorbells. All alarm systems are monitored out of their monitoring center located in the state of Iowa. Marr Security, 515-244-5660, permarsecurity.com. Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Christ is the Answer with Father John Ricardo is provided by Confluence Brewing Company, brewed locally and featuring regular, seasonal, and limited release beers available at local stores, bars, and restaurants. Confluence Brewing Company at 1235 Thomas Beck Road, off the bike trail south of Grays Lake, and online at confluencebrewing.com. Confluence Brewing Company offers curbside service and would like to thank you for your support. Thank you, Confluence Brewing Company, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Storm Alert Weather is provided by Divine Treasures. Divine Treasures is a Catholic book and gift store serving the Des Moines community for over 25 years. Their mission is to help Catholics know, love, and keep their faith in our Lord Jesus Christ and His Church. Divine Treasures is where you can find great Catholic books, beautiful Bibles, rosaries, jewelry, statues, and religious gifts for those memorable events in your life. Divine Treasures, 5701 Hickman Road, Des Moines, 515-255-5230. Thank you to Divine Treasures for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Thank you, Big Red Q Quick Print, for underwriting the sports report. Family owned and operated since 1980, Big Red Q Quick Print is a full-service print shop ready to help you with all your printing needs with speed and accuracy. BigRedQ-Des Moines.com.
Back with the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you today. Thank you for listening to the show. We're going to go to our guest today, Santonio Hill, who's done many different things, but one of the things he does is work for Vagabond Missions, at the Hill District Missionary for Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Santonio, thank you for joining the show.
Oh, yeah, great to be here. Thank you, Bo.
Now, before we get into the details and we like rambling on and trying to explore the big issues here, do you mind telling people what Vagabond Ministries is real quick and what you do with them?
Yeah, sure thing. So Vagabond Missions is a missionary organization, really a boots-on-the-ground mission. A lot of people may be familiar with Focus missionaries. I was a Focus missionary for about 3 years in my life. And I always like to say that Focus and Vagabond have a similar approach, but just different audiences. And so you'll get a team of at least 4 missionaries to go to a ghetto, a neighborhood, the projects, wherever that place is that has vulnerable teens. And really go out and just minister to these high school teens, high school youth, to be able to give them an opportunity to know who God is and have a relationship with Him in their lives, and just also give them an opportunity to thrive and not just survive in America.
No, I did notice that on the website that you talked about that more than survive, but figuring out how to help them thrive. And obviously, of course, missionary, that invocative of a faith and being able to do things like Bible studies and things like this. But I know that you've talked about the mission of even just presence, that kids, teenagers that are used to maybe they're being overlooked or ignored altogether, that Vagabond looks out for the ways in which to be present for people where they're at and in the neighborhoods that they already live in.
You said how so?
Oh, yeah, just I think that's an important fact of what you guys wanted to do, and I didn't know you wanted to talk more about that. Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
It's on the website. I should have this stuff memorized by at this point now, but I think it's we want to make sure that our teens are seen, known, heard, and loved, and know that there's hope for them in their lives. And really the goal is to break the cycle of hopelessness in these areas within America. And so we help out in any way that we can possible, within reason and within our limits. We're not a one-stop shop by any means, but we are connected with other either people or organizations within each city that we are located in to be able to help the people that we serve in those ways. Because I like to say, let's say, Bo, just you and I, let's say we're going on a hike, right? And I'm talking to you about taxes. And I'm just having all these questions because I have no clue, what tax bracket I'm in and how much I should be making back and how much I'm supposed to owe and all these things, all these questions. And so I'm asking you all these questions, and we're going along, and you're talking back to me, and then you just stop all of a sudden, and you don't respond back to me. You actually were stopping your tracks. I'm like, come on, dude. What's going on? Talk back to me. Why you hang me out to dry? And then I look back at you, and I see that you're looking up at this huge bear that's about to completely maul you.
I'm like where this story's going, by the way, so keep going.
Okay. Right. And so it's you see you can't answer my questions right now. You can't tell me everything I need to know about taxes right now, because, or just at least entertain my conversation, because you have a huge obstacle in your way, and all you can think of is, I got to survive. I'm in a situation where I could die right now, or I can just have a bad quality of life. And so I need certain needs met before we can dive back into that conversation about taxes. And so I like to sometimes use that analogy to talk about how some of the kids that we work with, they have situations that are, less fortunate circumstances that they found themselves in, either by being born into a situation or just the way that the dice has rolled for them in their lives. And so trying to connect them and get them the help that they need, because that allows a certain amount of freedom sometimes to be able to talk about God and talk about what it means to be Christian.
I like that analogy. I should point out real quick that if it ever is a matter of hiking or bears or taxes, I'm not the person you should talk to. But maybe Bud would be better at all those.
That's right. Santonio, we have a lot of listeners, I know, here in Central Iowa that do have concerns or like a passion for reaching out to youth. But I think sometimes in the church we do that better and worse. And a real temptation is kind of showing up with like a guitar slung around your shoulder and it's like, hey, kids, trying to spruce things up maybe with a laser light show or just throwing in some pizza and thinking that kind of like solves things.
You said that so excitingly. But
I know. I didn't make a great sales pitch for it. But
sorry.
I'm being there, like being on the front lines of some ministry to youth. What sort of things do you hear them talking about today in terms of the sorts of things that might draw them to the faith or maybe would push them away?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as of right now, I'm at like you said earlier, I'm at the Hill District. It's a brand new site, and we're doing a lot of the groundwork just to get our name out there and to build a base for hopefully the rest of the world. I mean, sorry, not the rest of the world, but for the rest of the time that we're in existence of just being here and alive. But I would say just because our kids aren't necessarily there yet, we just have created a space for them so that way they can feel comfortable coming. Because a lot of times some kids will muster up enough courage to go to church with their like grandma or their parents or whatnot, or sometimes they go to church because somebody passed away, so they're going to funerals. But a lot of times when they go into a church, they're not allowed to necessarily be themselves. So, for example, I would say most kids know how to act in church. They just hear like, oh, this is God's house, and they have a certain amount of reverence to them. And so even if they are wild out there in the streets and whatnot, sometimes they always would just kind of like draw it back. They're like, okay, this is God's house, so they show some kind of respect. But they might dress differently than other people inside the church. They may talk differently, might look different. And so we allow these kids, when they come into our space, to be themselves. We try to build that trust. We allow to build that bridge of trust with them first. Because a lot of times when people can tend to do evangelization wrong, and I say the church is like the whole reason why the church exists is to evangelize. That's from the very beginning of time. We should constantly be evangelizing. But we somehow just got really comfortable and just like don't feel like there's no more need to evangelize, and we just feel the need to just continue to nourish the disciples who are already in church and forgot what it means to go out and do what Christ did when he was here on earth for those 3 years of intense ministry that he was involved in. But yeah, definitely building a bridge of trust with these kids, allowing them to feel welcome first before you then start talking to them about behavior, because a lot of times it's people will walk into church and be focused on their behavior first, which I think is wrong. And then after they tell you how to act, then they're like, okay, now you can be here, now you can be welcome. Now we like you.
Yeah, St. Antonio.
But it really should be the other way around.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. What that reminds me of, right, is I think of St. Paul saying that he would be all things to all people in order to give them Christ. And in our society as it is today, it's easy to, when we care about something as much as the church, to sort of entwine it and map it into everything else we do. And part of that mapping is a sort of cultural and even sort of a class-based one. So churches will mistake what are sort of middle-class norms, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with middle-class norms of themselves, but when you graft them so tightly to the church that people who aren't a part of those norms don't feel like they can be welcome in church, that starts to get in the way of the mission, like you said, that has been there from the beginning. And that doesn't have to be some sort of scathing rebuke that we all feel comfortable with what we're familiar with, but if we're called to be evangelistic, we have to be willing to separate those two things and realize that some stuff like clothes or even just introductory behavior, as it were, is not part and parcel of the garment of faith. And I'm guessing that that's something that you get to run up against and try to convey to people for whom that might be alien.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, my fiance, she's really good at hospitality. Like, that's something that she like really enjoys and loves, but she's just not the greatest evangelizer. And like, she knows that, and she knows that she just wants everybody to be where she is in her faith journey, like right now, in an instant. And so, like, sometimes it takes a bit more formation for her to be able to, like, welcome people in. I'm the opposite. I would say I'm pretty good at evangelizing, but I'm kind of not too good at hospitality. And so, like, that's really good for our chemistry, obviously, in a sense, because we can teach each other to be better at certain things. But like, I don't think, I think that formation is another thing that is lacking within the church as well. Like, I went to the seminary for a few years, back in college, my college years. And then after that, I had a good amount of time and focus to also learn formation on how to evangelize and how to not just evangelize, but like just what it means to truly be Christian, Catholic Christian,
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just so many facets to it. Like the corporal works of mercy, I think, just get looked over so often. And I just think that if people knew that and like were formed well throughout churches and dioceses and all around, I think that there will be certain people and like a person that in every church and multiple people in every church and groups in every church, essentially, that will be quote unquote like, okay, we're hospitality, we do this really well, so we'll do that. And okay, we're a group of evangelizers, we do this really well, so we'll do that. And we're going to be the formation crew, so we'll, you know what I mean? But instead, it's like typically one person in each category,
right?
And it just, or sometimes it's just one person for every category.
That's right.
Unfortunately,
people pushed into stuff they're not good at. Like hospitality for me would be fine as long as you're good with eating like cheap pizza and beer, but that might not work out for everyone. So
exactly, yeah. And so I think sometimes people just don't necessarily explore their gifts all the time, and they just want to, like, I think the gospel just gets reduced to love God, love thy neighbor, which is real, which is also very good because Jesus said that, obviously. But I think that they don't stop. I think that people, and I'm guilty of this myself. So like everything I'm saying, I'm talking to myself as well. It's also like just it kind of becomes like, well, when I go to church, I say hi to the person to the left of me, and I say hi to the person to the right of me, as I would say hi to myself. So like I'm loving them as if I love myself, and also as I love God, because I wave to God and I say hi too. And I think that, it's just so much missing there.
Santonio, you mentioned evangelism earlier, and on our show, The Uncommon Good, we try to get in some to Catholic social teaching. So dealing, of course, with like justice issues and economic concerns, other things that are facing our country. Does Vagabond Missions, as you guys go about your work, how have you seen those sorts of topics arise? I mean, that's always a delicate balance, right? Like the church preaching the gospel and inviting others into the church, but at the same time recognizing like the felt needs that you see around you. You've already mentioned the corporal works of mercy, but I was wondering if you could say more about how you and the other missionaries talk about and think about those matters.
Yeah, that's a good question, man. And I want to be completely transparent with you. I probably do some like Catholic social like teaching things, like work, some capacity, but I don't have like the greatest formation on that. So like I said, I'm guilty of not knowing these things as well. So could you enlighten me on a few like Catholic social teaching like issues or things? Once again, I probably know them, but like I don't necessarily, like I might know them or do them, but I don't necessarily like know them well enough.
Sure.
To teach.
Yeah, that was, well, I mean, I guess something that comes to mind just thinking about America, the way that the zip code that you're born into can affect, like the trajectory of your life or the outcomes of your life. But as the church, I think especially ministers in inner cities, speaking to the concerns that you hear in that context, but also thinking about how do you address the whole person. So, teaching them about Jesus, of course, but say like, in this area, we know that many of the young men might end up in prison or even dead. How do we build up a community that's bringing people into like a better place in life?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question, man. So like I just just once again we just had like our first month of meetings. So we call them breakouts. It's our program.
Okay.
One of the programs that we run. And at breakout, this all will make sense, I promise. At breakout, we feed the kids dinner. We play a few games with them that like we run, the missionaries will run, and then at the end we'll have a brief talk. And so those like brief talks that we have is the opportunity to give them the gospel. And because we're a brand new site, we're just starting off really basic right now. We talked about respect God, your neighbor, and yourself. We talked about who God is, and we talked about our identities. And then we had a couple birthday parties, so we took some time to celebrate birthday parties. But we just have not, been in existence long enough to be able to start to like break some of those things down to some of those kids. But I would say something that I would say to that, is I would say it would go along the lines of identity, like and what it means to be a saint in your area, because I mean, it's always good to. That's a good question, because like it's something different about like what is a good saintly, like what does holiness look like for you in your area, your neighborhood. It might not always be to hand out money to people. Like if you have money, it might not always be good to pass out money to people in a poor area, poor neighborhood, just because like if that word spreads and gets around, then people will, might try and harm you for what you have, because they know you're so giving, and they may try to take advantage of you in that way. And so that might be something that you want to like discern on how to do it, when to do it.
Yeah, I think the way that you put it with how we think about holiness, sometimes unfortunately we might reduce that just to like being sort of like Bo was intimating earlier, just a good person who pays their taxes, eats their vegetables, says a certain number of prayers at night. And again, none of those things are bad in and of themselves. With someone like the example of Jesus, which I know the missionaries look to preeminently, you do have him saying things, I've come to bring sight to the blind, good news to the poor, freedom for prisoners. And so it becomes very concrete as we think about those on the margins of our society, how the gospel begins to speak to those sorts of matters. Go ahead, Bo. I think we're close to the break now, right?
Yeah, and we're getting ready to come to the break. Before we do that, though, if you want to make sure, could you tell people where they could go find out more about Vagabond Missions, and especially if they can see at the different cities that it's in, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. So we have a website, vagabondmissions.com, and you can just kind of explore around there and see more about our mission statement and our why we exist, and part of our vision and what we plan on doing. And so we're in a few different states. Right now we're in North Carolina, Greenville, North Carolina. We have one site there. We have 4 sites in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have 2 sites in Wichita, Kansas, and 1 site in Steubenville, Ohio. And we plan on expanding more this in the next couple of years to different sites around, like, for example, like Alabama, Philadelphia, Indianapolis, and a few other sites as well. Oh, yeah. I think maybe. Well, I don't know how much I'm actually allowed to.
Yeah, we don't want you to
got the scoop on it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so this is Santonio Hill, and like he said, Vagabond Missions. You can go check that out. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this. Folks, if you want to get in contact with Iowa Catholic Radio, it's easy to do. All you have to do is interact with all the ways in which we are on social media. iowacatholicradio.com, that's the website, and you can listen to us live, donate, sign up for newsletters, even look at pictures if you so choose to do. You can go to Facebook, look up Iowa Catholic Radio, and then befriend us, and then we will be Facebook friends. You can go to Twitter at IA Catholic Radio, and then you will see our tweets. And finally, if you want to, you can download the Iowa Catholic Radio app, and anywhere that you have data or even datum, I think you have to have more than just one datum, but so data, you can listen live, listen to music, donate, etc. So Facebook, Twitter, the app, the original website, Smart speaker. You can probably even mail us a letter, and Jimmy will sign it himself. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Storm Alert Weather is provided by Divine Treasures. Divine Treasures is a Catholic book and gift store serving the Des Moines community for over 25 years. Their mission is to help Catholics know, love, and keep their faith in our Lord Jesus Christ and His Church. Divine Treasures is where you can find great Catholic books, beautiful Bibles, rosaries, jewelry, statues, and religious gifts for those memorable events in your life. Divine Treasures, 5701 Hickman Road, Des Moines, 515-255-5230. Thank you to Divine Treasures for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and John Leonetti in the Morning is provided by Blessman International. Blessman International partners with volunteers and donors to provide sustainable programs for children in South Africa by leading 12-day all-inclusive experiences, sharing the heart of Christ with vulnerable children in South Africa. Teams are forming to do something significant in an African child's life. Learn more at blessmaninternational.org. Thank you to Blessman International for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Christ is the Answer with Father John Ricardo is provided by Confluence Brewing Company, a local brewery featuring seasonal and limited release beers located off the bike trail south of Grays Lake and online at confluencebrewery.com. Confluence Brewing Company has growlers to go, apparel, and other gifts for family and friends. Confluence Brewing Company is available for curbside service and would like to thank you for your support. Thank you, Confluence Brewing Company, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Here's your forecast on Iowa Catholic Radio. Strong low pressure moving through the Central Plains, and that'll bring us some showers off and on through the afternoon. Our high today in the low 40s, wind gusting up to 25 miles per hour. It'll stay windy overnight and cloudy, a mix of rain and snow showers, but little or no accumulation. Our low will be in the mid-30s. And then tomorrow, a few early showers, but we should clear up in the afternoon, 52 and windy. I'm meteorologist Steve Hamilton for Iowa Catholic Radio.
Back to the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to our show. We just had the chance to talk to missionary Santonio Hill, Hill District Missionary of Vagabond Missions in Pittsburgh. That's you got to listen to that on the first half of the show. You can go listen and find out more, from vagabondmissions.com. I'm really messing up seeing and talking, bud. This is pretty bad already.
I thought I was the one that hit my head.
That's
What's your excuse?
Hay fever.
Okay.
So we'll go with that one. So again, we want to say thank you to Santonio for joining us in the first part of the show. And, one of the things he was stressing, and I think that his ministry's reality is something we all have to face, is the kids he's helping out in these neighborhoods that have other difficulties, right, that they're specifically seeking out. People like Santonio are starting from scratch. And so when you think about the sort of long game that people like Vagabond Missions has to be willing to play, you start to see, some of the things that we were asking Santonio. A lot of it is just very basic stuff. He had that wonderful metaphor about if you're talking about taxes and then you see a bear, and I'm never going to forget this now every time there's tax season, that there's a lot of bears for kids that are distracting them, both from the path and asking the deep questions. But also when you have kids whose parents have never gone to church, you might be able to, they pick up on cues about how maybe you would behave in church or something like this. But in many ways, it's a foreign language again. And if mission work and being a missionary, if evangelism is part of the common good, people like Santonio have their work cut out for them.
Yeah, I think when Santonio was talking, Bo, for my mind, what came to my mind, I should say, is even for us hosting this show and for our listeners, there's a way in which our cities are organized today where it's just kind of easy to look past the very kind of communities and people that Christ has called us to be in contact with on a regular basis. So we think about the famous account that Christ gives of the end of time where, the sheep will be separated from the goats. And if you ask someone on the street, like a trivia question, at the end of time, when this great sifting takes place, on what basis will that be done? And I think the church at times have given sort of like mixed messages. I'm not saying the church, quad church, but those of us in with megaphones or like some sort of voice. When Jesus, of course, emphasizes in that instance that that those who are invited into the kingdom are the ones who, when he was hungry, he gave them something to eat, thirsty, gave them something to drink, visited them in prison. So when we're about those corporal works of mercy that Santonio mentioned, we're not doing an activity to make ourselves feel better, to check a box, but it's really at the heart of the church's mission. So we have to be about that sort of thing, and it's good to have voices like San Antonio who are doing that work to remind us about that.
You pulled what I did. You said San Antonio instead of San Antonio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because San Antonio is a place where you can get good Mexican and German food. Also the Alamo Bowl. But if you go to vagabondmissions.com, their mission talks about this, break the cycle, right? Inner city teens confront a cycle of neglect, violence, and broken family life. Vagabond Missions introduces them to Jesus and a loving community by mobilizing missionaries. Through outreach, every inner city teen can be known, loved, and experience hope for their lives. Connect, invest, transform. I think that idea about hope and hopelessness, right? And that's one of the things that we got to talk about in the first part of the show, is that we often think of evangelism and the missionary impulse of the church as information that you go give to people who don't know it otherwise.
Yeah.
But in many ways, it's the ability to break cycles of hopelessness. Because if there's one thing the good news of Christ does, is it says that there's a different way forward, especially when it looks like things are fated or in unbreakable cycles. When the gospel was first heard by the pagans, that was the sort of big philosophical break. All of these sort of pagan Gentiles have a religion, right, that sort of says you're not getting out of where you are. Things just happen over and over again. The gods are fickle. Fate is, ironclad. But with Jesus, right, death can be conquered by death. And so you don't have to be a philosopher. You don't have to be ancient. You can be a teenager in a part of a city that seems like things never change. And whatever else evangelism does, it is certainly about transmitting the truth of faith, but it's also about the presence of love first that then gives a new horizon of hope. It gives a different way for things to turn out. And I think when we're talking about evangelism and the common good, the reason it's not just about one-to-one, do I transmit the faith I know to someone else, it's do I make a world that has a hopeful horizon with love within it.
Well, I like how you use the word hope there, and we've tried to contrast in the past the difference between hope and optimism, but in the first part of the show, when I brought up justice concerns, whenever I do that sort of thing, I'm kind of concerned that listeners will hear that and be like, oh, Bud, he thinks he has all the answers, and that our goal is actually...
And now our new segment, Bud with the Answers.
We should, we need like a 2 or 3 minute...
Bud with all the answers segment, that's right.
Just like the zip whip that's really going on behind me. Thinking that the goal is to provide answers, but I think even with what I was just quoting from the Gospels a few minutes ago, where you think about when Jesus says, like even to give a drink of water to someone who needs it, like that has eternal ramifications. The goal, I think, is not to say, like, how do we solve the world's problems, but how do we meet the world's problems with the presence of Christ? And I think that's what a group like Vagabond Missions is doing, where, like you said, they're providing hope. And if you're listening and saying, like, well, I want to be about that sort of activity, I don't know how to do it in my own city, a great start is really just finding ways to break bread with, someone who you might not normally have the opportunity to do that with. So at Mercy, sometimes we challenge our students to be out like in service learning opportunities where, frankly, sometimes it leads them into uncomfortable places, but we see that as a good thing. That's the kind of stretching that the gospel calls us into.
Yeah, and, Santonio was bringing that up, and I was appreciating the fact of him being circumspect about this. It's not this obvious, like, oh, if I'm going to give to blank person, it will always turn out well. Like, he admits, right, that there's even a way... And I think that if you read their website, they get into this too, right? They don't want it to be a sort of handout mission. Not that like giving is what they're trying to do is to say that the kids have a future, and we believe in the capacity for them to have a future, even though the world signals to them they don't really have one. Our presence there, says Vagabond Missions, is to say to them, if we're here, there is at least one group that believes you have a future that doesn't have to be wedded to a cycle, to a narrative, one that you don't even really have a choice. Like, people gave that to these kids. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there are material conditions that make it difficult to break away from that. But, Santonio and his, compatriots across all these cities, that presence, right, that's why they're in it for the long haul. And I know that was one thing that getting to talk with Santonio as well off air is, they are, to start from scratch is to say, before I read a creed to you, before we hear a sermon together, I'm here. I'm here because you're important enough to be here. And where, for you listeners, even if you're not going to become a vagabond missionary, if you're not going to yourself do whatever you choose to do when it comes to the corporal works of mercy. Sorry, the start is presence. To say someone, I love you enough to be here, and by loving you, I think there's a hopeful future that can be different than what you're doing now. That is the sort of context for the seed of faith to grow in.
And I think when we come to the point, Bo, where we do talk about Jesus, we have to give them the flesh and blood Jesus from the Gospels. And what I mean by that is you can kind of abstract this Christ out who does end up, in a certain sense, being kind of non-threatening to us. But if you get into Jesus as we read about him and hear about him from the apostolic testimony, he's someone who's willing to step on toes. My mind as I'm talking about this is going back even to the Magnificat, when Our Lady first hears that she's going to be the one who bears the Christ child. She, sings this song of praise where the hungry are filled, the rich are sent away empty, the powerful are cast down from their thrones. So that's going to look different in different contexts, but we have to say, is our life as a community, does it embody a way of life that actually leads to those outcomes, is the exactly wrong kind of phrase, but that that witnesses to that sorts of things. And the way that I've thought about this in the past, I'm going to crib some notes from a divinity school professor that we had. He said, a religion is not interesting if it doesn't tell you what to do with your pots and pans. And what that basically means is that, religion or following Jesus for us can't be a kind of hobby. It informs every aspect of our lives. And so, I just know in modern America today, like one thing that we hate to talk about is money. Jesus brings it up a lot, and he's willing to challenge. He starts with his closest followers. How are you using the abundance of the gifts that God's given to you? And I think we're only doing half of evangelism if we don't move to those sorts of conversations.
Well, and if the idea of evangelism is to bring the good news, where does the good news need to be heard? And of course, that's when your child who's barely listening goes everywhere, and you're like, okay, good job, right? Jesus belongs everywhere. Congratulations, that's true. But what we're trying to say, of course, is when we talk about the common good or social justice, when we talk about even the word politics, we mean the city, polis, the whole body politic, the whole living organism that is us together with life together. And so as Christians, if we're saying what has to happen with evangelism is go and preach the gospel everywhere, and we go, yeah, everywhere, Bo, and you're like, true. So let's ask ourselves where the gospel's not. And let's ask ourselves why it might not be there. And so when Santonio, I did it too, so when Santonio, forgive us, Santonio, we're messing your name up. When we go, where is there not the gospel? We have to level with ourselves and ask, what have we done that we are starting over from scratch? But why are there parts of our cities that are starting over from scratch? And we can blame entire aspects of the culture, but it ultimately comes down to us. What were we doing? Where did we fall asleep? Where there was a part of our cities that to go evangelize there is to start from scratch. And that is a hard question we have to ask ourselves. And that goes back to that part that we were saying in the very beginning with the interview is, if we've attached too much of the accidents of middle-class life to the church, we're just preventing our ability to be planting seeds where they're needed the most. And that's not to cast aspersions on what we're like. It is to say, we can make good things stand in the way of the gospel, bud, and we got to be willing to hear that.
Well, and one point that Santonio made that I especially appreciated, he said, whenever I talk about these things, I'm preaching to myself, and I definitely feel that way about our radio show. I haven't done a great job of this by any means, but being at Mercy College and specifically teaching that course, Servant Leadership, Bo, where we were able to cooperate with some of the organizations in our community that are doing this work, one thing that stood out to me, and I know in 2021, many of us are thinking about, like, how do I balance the checkbook if you're like me and still use a checkbook? But so you're saying, like, I hear this challenging message, but I don't know exactly what gifts I can bring to the table. And this gets back, I think, Bo, to the gospel passage about the widow's mite, where you just give out of what God has given to you, regardless of what that is. And being at places like St. Vincent de Paul down in the Riverbend area of Des Moines, I know there are needs like that go beyond even the monetary. The monetary is always important for organizations like that. But we saw when we were there, training around like basic financial literacy, how to do a job application, even if you can sacrifice time providing childcare to someone who otherwise won't be able to make a job interview. Those are huge gifts for some folks, and so those can be great starting places for the kind of evangelism or witnessing to the gospel that we have in mind.
When you're talking about balancing a checkbook because no one does it, I'm imagining you like having a quill pen and doing it like calligraphy, right? It's like double long form.
I always like those pens. I think with quill pens, is that where you kind of like
you have to lick the pen
to get it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that makes you feel like it's more incarnational, like balancing your checkbook. It's sort of similar when he was talking about like the whole you see a bear. I was all like, is he going to tell us that you should talk to the bear about taxes? Because like that would confuse the bear. But his metaphor was much better than what I was tracking with it first.
You can tell he's definitely working with youth because I'm prone to sometimes falling in the trap of like high fluent phrases or something, or getting like that precise philosophical terms. Let me talk to you about bears.
Yeah, it was,
and really more of us should be about that.
I know. I'm literally every tax season from now on. The last thing that I would think about this is, again, goes down to geography and how much what we decide about spreading the good news has everything to do with geography. I remember when Deacon Dave out of hospital fame here in Des Moines pointed out that the sisters made a choice where they put the hospital, and they meant to put it where they did because they knew it would serve the people who needed it most. And geography, you were saying zip code determines too much about how people's lives turn out. And do we ask the sort of zip code sort of questions is when we're talking about evangelism, if we believe in an incarnate God, a God who took on flesh and walked around the precursors to zip codes. Don't bag us on the history here. We know there were not zip codes in ancient Israel, but you get my point. I think that when we say evangelism and the common good, this gets back to how vagabond missions and people like them are living that out. They are an incarnate presence in a place where there is a cycle of hopelessness. And there is nothing more evangelical than incarnating the church's ministry in places that it is not currently, where it has to start from scratch. And that's why I'm glad we get the chance to hear from people like Santonio and the wonderful ministry he is helping out.
Yeah, there's just parts of our life, to be honest, Bo, that drive us many times indoors these days, air conditioning, streaming services, etc. So I guess I'm all about sort of simplistic or simple ways to start today, but even stepping outside of your house and sort of like hitting the pavement in your own neighborhood as a kind of start. We what's it called, like Front Porch Republic? We used to have this idea that the kind of important conversations that communities are meant to have start on the front porch. So as Catholics, we can be about that sort of thing. But also just driving through some of the major urban centers in America, even Des Moines, but I think about a town like Milwaukee, where so much of that urban core is dotted by spires. That's going to look different in different lives, but I think as Catholics, we still have that opportunity at a place like St. Anthony's down on the south side of Des Moines to be present there. And we've mentioned this on the show before, but like the Eucharistic procession that they do each year, being creative as Catholic communities about how do we have a presence that's not merely a building. The building is significant, but that has this public in the streets sort of witness.
No, I think that's a perfect way to sort of wrap all this up is go ye forth into the world and spread the gospel, baptize the nations in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Well, that means that you start from point A and you have to go out to point B. And sometimes if we're a little too happy with point A, we don't have to denigrate being at a place. You have to have a place in order to go out from it. We've got the places down, and it's good that we've had a sort of renewed effort to care about the places we're at. So that means that it's about time that we mature into going to those other points out in the field to bring Christ with us wherever we go. And one more time, we want to thank Santonio Hill and Vagabond Missions for doing that work in the places they're at. This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our families, in our cities, every part of our cities, in our state, our nation, our world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr signing off. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next week. But if people want to be a part of the prayer life here at Iowa Catholic Radio, what are the ways that they can join us in praying?
Sorry, I'm just laughing because I was thinking back to, I heard the eagle screech, and I can't help but think back to the cat's meow and how we tried to roll out different animal sounds.
That's right.
That's when the zip whip line blew up.
That's right. We need to mess with it again because, like, if you take the eagle off, people like the eagle. It's true.
More seriously, though, if you do want to join us in prayer, we pray the Rosary daily on air at 5:30 a.m., 9:30 a.m., 9:30 p.m. The Rosary is available anytime on the Iowa Catholic Radio app. A couple other prayer opportunities. You can pray the Angelus daily with us at 6 in the morning, and then we broadcast the Divine Mercy Chaplet at 3 in the afternoon.
That's right. And, this is a ministry that is beyond just the people speaking right now, beyond the people who are beyond the people who are behind the boards. That's a lot of B sounds, I'm sorry. But Jimmy, in some ways, we want to make Jimmy the mascot of the entire, just the whole thing we do. But it's not even just Jimmy. It's not the people in the offices and the people up front. It is all of us together, including you, and your efforts and what you do for us here at Iowa Catholic Radio obviously pay off dividends. Your prayers, your volunteer work, just looking at how successful the Spring Carathon was shows how much you do to make us the station that we are. But it very much comes down to your material gifts as well. If you consider making donations, especially ongoing ones throughout the year, you aid us in bringing Christ's message. We're talking about evangelization this whole show, bud. You aid us in our evangelization efforts by making sure to go to Iowa Catholic Radio, the Iowa Catholic Radio app, or calling 515-223-1150 and considering donating a gift. And we want to say thank you for all the things that you do. You know, but earlier Santonio had to stop himself because he was sort of like getting ready to maybe say information they weren't ready to say. Yeah. Should I do that to Jimmy? Because I heard there's events that are coming up.
Can we talk about events?
How much trouble will we get if it doesn't turn out to be true?
That would be funny.
Well, in the wake of, I know we mentioned this last week, but with the Carathon just ending a couple weeks ago, a special word of gratitude to all of our listeners helping us to meet our goal, $200,000. That was a great thing. But keep your eyes peeled for some upcoming events because we're going to invite you into supporting the radio station, but with, I think, a little bit of fun thrown in.
That's right.
So what event are you thinking?
Is there a sporting event?
We'll throw some out.
Are you talking about golf? We are talking about a golf outing.
Yeah, the golf outing.
We'll say that. I mean, plans are in motion that it, at this point, looks like, bearing anything else, should happen.
That's right.
It's not like there might be any big surprises in our society that would throw a wrench in people's
That's right.
Yeah, nothing that anything could just happen that would just stop any plans whatsoever right now.
I mean, also, we tried to make lawn darts a thing, but the lawyers struck that down.
But always check the events page at iowacatholicradio.com to always keep up on that, as well as Facebook.
Jimmy and I want to up a trivia night.
Well, we had a trivia night a couple years ago because I helped put it together, and we wanted to do it again.
Are you a trivia guy?
I mean, not when a cheater like Jimmy's running it. No,
wow.
Oh, no, shots fired.
Actually, Lee and Eddie was running it. No.
On that note, I think we should let you go. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll see you all next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.